Giant Orange Records.
Hello, and welcome to part 2 of my 2023 record finds. My dog keeps distracting me. He's a good boy. Sometimes you gotta take to the internet, Discogs, eBay. This is John Vanderslice's Time Travel is Lonely. It is a great indie rock masterpiece, I would say. This guy takes some chances. He's a really funny dude. There's plenty of interviews of him online. He plays acoustic solo shows these days, but I believe this record is from 2001. This is a reissue that I believe came out in 2009. It's on Afternoon Records, which is like a division of Barsuk Records. This album contains a great song, many great songs. My favorites are Keep the Dream Alive, You Were My Fiji, Gainesville, Florida, where he was born. Time Travel is Lonely, and Everything Changed are great examples of songwriting. This guy runs a great studio in Oakland, and he used to have one in the Mission District of San Francisco called Tiny Telephone. It would be a dream to record an album there. And because one John Vanderslice album isn't enough, here is the Life and Death of an American Four-Tracker. This one has great songs about me and my 424. But yeah, it's a great album. He has these little like classical music interludes. Southern Culture on the Skids, At Home With. They recorded this during the pandemic. I got to see them again in January of 2023. I've seen this band maybe close to 10 times, but I hadn't seen them in probably more than 10 years. They signed the record for me. They covered Dear Mr. Fantasy, Call Me. It's a great song. Sugartown. Picked up a copy of the White Stripes' first album. Now, this album is incredible. Like, this might be their best album. They're definitely trying their hardest. Jimmy the Exploder, Stop Breaking Down, The Big Three, Killed My Baby, Sugar Never Tasted So Good, Astro, One More Cup of Coffee is a Bob Dylan cover, I Fought Piranhas. Anyway, it's their debut. This is obviously a reissue. Finally got the Olivia Tremor Control's second LP. This one's called Black Foliage, and I had to make a special run to the post office because on my Bandcamp, I hadn't updated my address. So I had to run out there, and thankfully I intercepted this the morning before they put it on the truck. I was talking to this really nice guy at the post office. He helped me out. This is on green vinyl, and it's a great like neo-psychedelic album. I believe it's from 1999. There's elements of like the Beach Boys. I keep saying the Olivia Tremor Control, who are on Elephant Six, who's getting a documentary this year. They're sort of like the Velvet Underground of the 1990s. They're so incredible. They came up with a lot of good ideas, crazy ideas, and they just went for it. And while we're on the Elephant Six thing, In an Aeroplane Over the Sea by Neutral Milk Hotel is another great indie rock album. John Vanderslice was very influenced by this album. And I really want to see that Elephant Six documentary that came out. I don't live in a city that's cool enough or important enough where they're making a stop here, but hopefully that'll be on a streaming service one of these days. And of course, this is on Avery Island. This is not the 2023 reissue, but one that came out quite a bit earlier than that. And to fit this record on one album, they had to kind of cut the noise track, or the silent track, really, that is the final track on the album. But I like the album cover of this much better than the one that was reissued in 2023. Anyway, this is top tier indie rock. These are indie rock darlings on Elephant Six, and I guess Merge Records put it out. But Elephant Six was this collective made up of the members of Neutral Milk Hotel, the Olivia Tremor Control, Apples in Stereo, and a few other artists. Picked up this silver or clear reissue of Velvet Underground's Loaded. If there ever is such a thing as a fun Velvet Underground album, this is definitely it. This pressing sounds incredible. I've heard layers to the music that I'd never heard before. All I had was kind of an 80s CD of this album. And they did a really great job. This came out in January 2023. And the original album is from 1970. It was Lou Reed's final album with the band. He'd kind of checked out. Mo Tucker, even though she's credited as the drummer, did not play any drums on here. And they got 3 different drummers to play on the sessions. And of course, Doug Yule sings lead vocals on about half the songs here, which you may not notice at first because he sounds so much like Lou Reed. And that's what Lou Reed liked about him. They were both Pisces, woohoo. And he liked that and the fact that he sounded a lot like him. But I can kind of sort of tell if you really crank the dial up far enough on the stereo, kind of tell like Lou has a little bit more of rawness in his voice, and Doug Yule's a little bit more of a crooner. It's probably my favorite Sonic Youth album, Murray. I found this over at Park Avenue in Orlando. It's a great little independent record store. Anyway, Sympathy for the Strawberry. Like, if there's one song that you absolutely must hear off of this record, it's Sympathy for the Strawberry. This is a nice little reissue of the A La La's first album, self-titled debut. Great, like, kind of psychedelic indie pop. It sounds very much like the 60s, and they did that very intentionally. It was a great record by them. I think they released a new album this year, which, you know what? I need to get a copy of that too. Woo-wee! This is Gringo Star. That's Gringo Star. My son thought that was actually Ringo Starr, the Beatles drummer. We saw this band in Jacksonville in February at the Winterland 5 Festival. You might see kind of a theme here. I saw a lot of bands that I love at that festival. I got this album from them and also their live album. This band is from Atlanta. They've been around for a really long time. And in fact, a long time ago, I was in a band and we played a show together. I believe it was in Greensboro, North Carolina or somewhere like that. And the venue didn't want to pay the band that I was in for whatever reason. They were being kind of shitty to us. And, some of these guys from Gringo Star, which I think their band was called Affair Jewel, they pretty much threatened to kick some ass and maybe fuck up the venue if they didn't pay us, and they ended up paying us, and I will be forever grateful for them for standing up for us to this, fairly evil venue that we ended up playing at. So that really created a bond. And I talked to these guys in Jacksonville at Winterland, and they actually took me to the backstage area. It was really cool. It was fun to catch up with them. They put out a new album this year, which I don't have yet. They put on one hell of a live show. It was very psychedelic garage rock, influenced by mostly 60s rock and 70s punk, I would say, which that's some of my absolute favorite stuff. And along the same lines with some independent garage rock, this is the Woolly Bushmen in Shambles. I saw these guys in Orlando a few years ago. I think the band has since broken up and certain members have moved out of state, but they put on one hell of a live show. They're a 3-piece. Main guy Simon, he plays Farfisa organ, and he kind of climbs on top of the organ. He knocks the organ over. He jumps on top of it. It's some pretty wild stuff. And because one Woolly Bushman album isn't enough, and again, Park Avenue in Orlando had these, had to get the second one as well. This one's on orange translucent vinyl, Arduino. Yeah, these guys were so fun. I'm so glad I got to see them. And I thought while I was in that record store, I was like, man, I've already got quite a stack of records here, but when am I ever going to get the opportunity to pick up these albums again? Another fun band and kind of in the same vein, like psychedelic garage rock with a lot of keyboards, is the Mystery Lights on Wick Records, which is a subsidiary of Daptone. And Wick Records is also the home of the Archaics, who are one of my favorite bands ever. Psychedelic garage rock, pretty noisy, pretty lo-fi, pretty fun. And then, man, this is Mojo Nixon and Skid Roper. This is an EP called Get Out of My Way. It's probably the best song about being stuck in traffic that's ever been written. So funny. Mojo Nixon he does a couple nods to the Velvet Underground. And if you're familiar with Wheeler Walker Jr., he's almost sort of like if Wheeler Walker Jr. was around in the 80s and he was influenced by the Velvet Underground and Lou Reed rather than, mocking pop country. Mojo Nixon gets you kind of most of the way there. It's kind of very adult-oriented lyrics and themes, but also hilarious and fun at the same time. Another one of those holy moly, I can't believe I finally found this record. This is Richard Swift, Dressed Up for the Letdown. Very influenced by Harry Nilsson and ELO and the Beatles and just kind of like old Disney movie kind of vibes. Richard Swift was a brilliant songwriter, performer, producer. He had his own studio, and he was also the touring keyboardist for the band The Shins for a pretty long time. And unfortunately, we lost Mr. Swift a few years ago. He had some health problems. A long time ago, I got to see him in Austin at South by Southwest. I was able to talk to him after the show. He's one of the nicest people I've ever met. And this guy's super tall. I was really shocked at how tall he was. He put on a great show. He played a Wurlitzer electric piano, and then he switched over to guitar. He's playing a Telecaster, but I absolutely love the songs on here. This is indie rock at its best. I'd say if you like Wilco or Dr. Dog or Harry Nilsson, you'd probably really like this record. And oh man, Charlie Crockett, the man from Waco. My friend Zane told me about this album last year. They had a copy. It sounds good. This summer, I picked it up, and when my friend told me about this album, I was like, yeah, it's pretty cool. I liked a couple tracks. As they say, that shit hits different on vinyl. This is one of my most played records of this year. Alt country meets soul meets folk meets, I don't know. It's kind of genre defying music. And Mr. Crockett is from Texas, and he's supposedly a distant relative of Davy Crockett. And while we're on sort of the alt-country thing, I picked up a copy of my favorite Sturgill Simpson album, Meta-Modern Sounds in Country Music. Probably don't need to tell you a whole lot about Sturgill Simpson. If you know, you know, but it was a very rock-sounding record, very rockin', almost kind of psychedelic country, and he seems to talk a lot about his personal life and his experiences, and this man speaks from the heart. This is possibly one of the high watermark gold standards of alt country. Lucinda Williams, Car Wheels on a Gravel Road. She is a poet, a master of words who just speaks from the heart. And I saw Miss Lucinda many years ago in Boca Raton, and I just didn't really get it. But, I was probably younger and more impatient at that point. And after listening to more of her records, I'm like, oh, that's how she rolls, man. And I love this record just that much more every time I hear it. And here's a record that probably influenced a lot of indie bands and alt country bands. I got the reissue this year. It was a Record Store Day reissue. Big Star, #1 record. And ironically, this record failed to chart or do anything when it came out. And it was super influential on REM and people like that. Jayhawks, bands like that. They were from Memphis, and Alex Chilton is their lead singer, who was 15 or 16 when he sang The Letter, the big hit by the Box Tops. This is Television's Marquee Moon, very, very influential guitar album from the punk rock era in 1977. This is a Rocktober reissue on clear vinyl. Unfortunately, we lost Mr. Tom Verlaine in January of 2023. See No Evil, Venus, Marquee Moon are incredible songs. Iggy Pop and the Stooges. This is a 2 LP remix. I honestly can't remember which of the mixes I liked better. I've had an old copy of this, which I rarely listen to because the mix sounded god awful. I mean, it was unlistenable. In fact, both of these mixes sound way better than whatever the mix is that I have. Anyway, very important punk rock album. A little bit different than the other Stooges albums. And of course, I got a reissue of the Ramones' self-titled debut from 1976. I mean, this has to be one of the most important records of all time. It's like, okay, like I can finally drop $20 on this thing. It's a Rhino reissue. This record sounds incredible. Like I'm hearing layers of music that I hadn't heard before, and there's definitely quite a few guitar overdubs on certain songs where I heard up to 3 guitars on the same song. This definitely is one of the most important rock albums of all time, and this might be the best band ever. Almost everybody likes the Ramones, even my 8-year-old son. He loves them. He called them the Ram Ones. I finally picked up a copy of the Cars debut. This is a very impressive record in so many ways. The cover band to play in covers the song Moving in Stereo, which I'd never really heard that before. They say that it is in the movie Fast Times at Ridgemount High, but the scene that song plays in, I was like, what? There's a song playing in that scene? I think we all know what I'm talking about. Anyway, that is a very challenging song to play. Great album. Like, I thought this was a greatest hits when I was a kid, but it's actually their first album. Robert Gordon with Link Wray. I didn't even know that this was a thing until this year. And then I found this record, and not to be left alone, there's also the second one that they did together, Fresh Fish Special. I love Link Wray. He's absolutely one of my favorite guitarists. Robert Gordon is an incredible singer. This is like late 70s punk era, but it's like, 50s rockabilly style music, updated a little bit for the times. Finally got a nice clean copy of The Best of Sam Cooke. He's been one of my favorite singers for a very, very, very long time. Been listening to this stuff since I was a kid. And my God, the impressions keep on pushing. Absolutely love early Curtis Mayfield, Keep on Pushing. This was Chicago soul, but I grew up in coastal South Carolina, just a little bit outside of Charleston. They call this beach music there, especially in Myrtle Beach, because, the story I heard is that the pavilions in Myrtle Beach, they would play soul music, and the radio stations wouldn't play soul music because the musicians were black, which is really a shame. They could go to these little Myrtle Beach pavilions, and the DJs and jukeboxes would have all these great records from bands like The Impressions. And this is a slightly later 60s Impressions album. This is My Country. Absolutely love that song. It's a fun album. Curtis Mayfield definitely wrote some great political protest songs. And another one of those classic beach music songs was Barefootin'. And again, you can call it beach music. People that are annoying probably use the term beach music. People who are fucking cool would say Chicago soul because they know what's up. And Barefootin' by TV and the Tribesmen. Now, this is not the original. I think Bobby Parker. This is a great record. This is a fun little danceable soul record. And it's about like 22 minutes long. And it's 22 minutes of fun. That yard sale in January, I found Wilson Pickett's Midnight Mover. This one's in pretty darn good shape. Most Wilson Pickett records I have are all completely trash, warped, and unplayable. But this one was in really nice condition. And it's great music within this. Also from that same yard sale, this is Smokey Robinson and the Miracles Make It Happen. Now, funny story behind this is the original 1967 release, which features a little song called The Tears of a Clown, which is probably my favorite Smokey Robinson song. So this didn't get much airplay until 1970 when some DJ discovered the song Tears of a Clown and started playing it on his radio station all the time. And then it kind of became a national hit because of one DJ playing the song over and over again. And then they re-released this album with a very similar cover, but it wasn't called Make It Happen. It was called Tears of a Clown, to obviously capitalize on the popularity of this overlooked song that was 3 years old at the time, which in the 60s was an eternity. Love is Strange, Mickey and Sylvia. I love that song. It almost sounds like two people making love in a song, which is pretty envelope-pushing material for the 1950s when it came out. And the guitar playing is so insane. The vocals are nuts. Like, I would put this up with like the best guitar playing of 1950s early rock and roll. It's up there with Chuck Berry and Buddy Holly and Bo Diddley. But it's uniquely its own style of guitar playing too. And anyway, the rest of this record is very solid. This is, I believe, like a greatest hits or some sort of a compilation that came out in the mid-60s. So anyone that knows me, that lets me talk about music with them, probably knows that I kind of hate white guy Stratocaster blues from the 80s, 90s, 2000s. But I absolutely love the original real Delta blues from the 40s and 50s. And I found this amazing Muddy Waters best of. This record is so cool that it's also ADA compliant with a little braille strip on top, which is fascinating. Muddy Waters is the man, super influential on the Rolling Stones. They owe a lot to this guy, and you can see like he wrote all these great songs and performed them. Like great guitar playing, great vocals. Hoochie Coochie Man, I'm Ready, Rolling Stone, I Just Want to Make Love to You, Honey Bee, She Moves Me, I Can't Be Satisfied. And the Rolling Stones obviously covered I Just Want to Make Love to You. And you think about it, like what a bold statement that is. And that's why I love these records. And they were recorded so early. Some of this is recorded in April 1948. A lot of it's recorded in like 1950, 51, 54, 52. Howlin' Wolf, more real folk blues, also on Chess. You can see it's a different label from the Muddy Waters, so they're kind of different eras. But man, Howlin' Wolf is the real deal, man. Like, you don't want to fuck with this guy. It's just legit blues, man. Like, he screams it and you fucking believe it, because you have to believe it once you hear it. Hound Dog Taylor, this is on Alligator Records. Man, this dude could play some slide guitar. You can kind of see the slide on his pinky finger there. He played these like cheap Japanese guitars with Teisco type guitar. Man, this dude would rip anybody a new asshole on the slide guitar. And I don't care like how good some of these like modern blues dudes are. This has just like a rawness and a realness and sort of a gritty imperfection that just speaks to whatever that is inside my soul that just loves this shit. In 2023, we saw the reissue of John Lee Hooker's Burnin'. Detroit is Burnin'. I mean, John Lee Hooker's another one of them Delta blues guys that moved to... He actually went to Detroit rather than Chicago. But man, it's the real deal too. There's a version of Boom Boom on here. I found another John Lee Hooker original on Verve Folkways. This one's called And 7 Nights. Again, just like super like groovin' boogie. Again, what I like about these guys, and I think what they have in common, what the Delta blues musicians have in common with punk rock, is it's not so much about playing everything perfectly in tune and in time or whatever. It's just about having the boogie and the feel and just that rawness and realness. And so I read Bob Dylan's book this year where he talks about various songs. Talks about Bobby Bare, Detroit City, while we're on the topic of Detroit musicians. I absolutely love that song. I really, really, really like Bobby Bare. 500 Miles from Home, is really good too. Miller's Cave. I love Miller's Cave. My favorite version is when Graham Parsons sings it with the International Submarine Band, but Bobby Bare knew about that song. And I find that Bobby Bare's vocal delivery is very similar to Chris Christopherson. I feel like he was a huge influence on Christopherson. Townes Van Zandt is one of the most important songwriters ever. He played country music. He was from Texas. Very big, bold personality. Definitely could be the poster child of outlaw country. Geno King. Now this guy played with Ray Price and Farron Young. I had to go to eBay to find this one. There was one on Discogs, but the eBay find was actually better. And this record was issued in the early 80s, I believe, in Canada. And I learned about Geno King while reading Deke Dickerson's wonderful book called The Strat in the Attic. And it's just like classic heartbroken country songs. And in Deke's book, he has one chapter dedicated to Geno King, and he kind of became friends with Geno King. These country guys lived a pretty debaucherous lifestyle. Mickey Newberry, this is the guy that wrote the song Just Dropped In to See What Condition My Condition Was In, which Kenny Rogers had a big hit with, and it's featured in the Big Lebowski movie. Anyway, Frisco Mabel Joy is this album. This is like super depressing but beautiful, like folk country type songs, and it has some like psychedelic tinges too. This definitely pulls on your heartstrings, and it hits hard and it hits deep, and it goes to levels that you might not expect and you might not necessarily always be ready to go to. And Mickey Newberry also had this Live at Montezuma album. It was actually a double LP, like a budget package, repackaged thing. And Looks Like Rain is the other album here. But I really like the live album because as sad and depressing and heartfelt and melancholy as most of his songs are, guy is hilarious on stage with his stage banter. Like, he's almost a comedian with the stories that he tells in between these songs. And then it's just dead quiet. You could hear a pin drop while he just plucks his acoustic guitar and just sings these beautifully sad songs. Southern Accents, kind of an overlooked Tom Petty record, and kind of deals with being from the South. Finally picked up another Grateful Dead album. This is, of course, American Beauty from 1970. A lot of people consider this to be their best album. And I tried to play this on like a Friday night or something. I was just like, man, this put me to sleep. So like I played it on like a Saturday or a Sunday morning. I'm like, man, this is a perfect like coffee club, mellow morning type album more than a Friday night type album. This also contains what's probably my favorite Grateful Dead song. It's called Ripple. Really great song. So, here's some further proof that I'm not really a Deadhead. I recently picked up the Dead's debut album. I'll say that I really like this record. It has kind of more of like a Jefferson Airplane type of mid-60s San Francisco type sound. All the songs on here are pretty short. A lot of them, don't breach the 2 or 3 minute mark, which I love. Like I'm not a big fan of jam rock so much. I mean, it's okay sometimes in the right setting, but I like the more like concise 2-3 minute rock, blues, pop song or whatever. And there's a lot of that on here. Here's another like San Francisco album that I kind of overlooked. Country Joe and the Fish, electric music for the mind and body. Like I dismiss them as some kind of like, San Fran, Bay Area, whatever, like 60s hippie bullshit. When I heard this, I thought, what garage rock album is this? Like there's tons of cool organ on here. And again, this record isn't in the best of condition, but it's still listenable and enjoyable. I need to like sometimes clear my prejudgments out of my head and just sit back and really listen to stuff. Like, I love it when people play stuff for me without telling me who it is. Guess who this is? And I don't know. Well, that's what happened with this. My friend Chris at Sounds Good was playing this, and I was just like, what the hell is this? Why have I not heard this, and why do I not have this? Harvey Mandel, Best Of. He was sort of a jazz rock musician. Can't really explain much, but this guy was one of those dudes that took those, in guitar amp geek world, a lot of guys would take these old tube PA heads and turn them into guitar heads, and you could get a really awesome guitar amp sound for a fraction of the cost of, say, like a Fender amp or whatnot. And Harvey Mandel was definitely one of the guys that converted a tube PA head into an awesome guitar amp. And sadly, we lost Mr. Rodriguez in 2023. I saw him a few years ago in Fort Lauderdale. And man, when I first heard his first album, Cold Fact, my mind was blown in oh so many ways. And then the documentary Searching for Sugar Man came out. It was shown at a local art theater in Charleston where I lived at the time, and I just ate up all of it. I didn't get this album until this year because I had the CD for a long time. And actually, like, the bonus tracks on the CD were some of my favorite songs as opposed to the album tracks. But the final song on the album, Cause, is one of the most haunting, beautiful, poetic folk rock songs I've ever heard. You could also say 2023 is the year that I discovered Zamrock, or rediscovered it, I should say. During the pandemic, a friend of mine, a German friend of mine, sent me this little video from YouTube that explained Zamrock in a nutshell. And I loved it, but all the record stores were shut down because of the pandemic. And so I finally picked up this one this year. If the Stooges were from Africa, I think this is kind of the sound that you would get. Except it's a little bit more like religious themed. Then switching over to jazz, Chico Hamilton, Passing Through. What a great record. I can't say too much else about this except this is easily one of my favorite jazz records I've ever heard. And if you don't know much about jazz, this would be a very good entry-level jazz album for you. Also found this one at a yard sale, Stanley Turrentine, featuring Shirley Scott. Shirley Scott was Stanley Turrentine's wife. You will notice that the two of these played on a lot of jazz records on Blue Note. This one, I believe, is from 1967 or so, and it's a very, very enjoyable jazz record. Again, this would also be a very good entry-level jazz record. And then, so the guitarist for Chico Hamilton was this Hungarian dude named Gabor Szabo, who I learned about through my jazz guitar book. It's a good coffee table book. This album is called Dreams. Like, when I first saw this, I thought this album was a psychedelic rock band called Gabor Szabo, but I didn't know any better. I mean, it is a band, but it's led by Gabor, who was that Hungarian guitarist, who also made this album called The Sorcerer. This is a great live album. This one is called Rambler. It's from the 1970s, and man, this thing, when you think you just can't get enough of an artist and they keep delivering, this is absolutely that record. And last, but absolutely not least, I found this at a local Christian thrift store. It's a 1950s contemporary composer named Khachaturian. Gain Ballet Suites No. 1 and 2, conducted by the Philharmonic Symphony Orchestra of New York. This is a Columbia LP. Beautiful record. I mean, this is, like I said, I think this, the composer was Armenian, and It's a pretty badass fucking classical record. Like it has some like really, really hard hitting drums. Like if you told an orchestra to play the timpanis and the drums so hard that you think you might break the drum head with every hit, and I came for the cover and I stayed for the music.